This is turn 48 of Degeneracy. We had many fights, but most of these were not important at all. So we see that Marignon, I believe, has sent some horrors at our pretender, and they managed to get rid of her and send her back home. We have captured a province that had no province defense. We raided a province from Atlantis. We had a province raided back by Atlantis, this time with a huge blob of troops. We lost this province to Marignon just having a huge number of guys, and interestingly, he's got two of these beast bats, so it's possible that he has an anarchy free-spawning them, or it's possible that he got them from an event, because usually these guys are not summoned individually. Here in the Great Dunes, we see yet another army, so Marignon's got two of these. In Lake Eternal, another massive group of guys to recapture a province from Atlantis. In the Black Peaks, Jomon has besieged our fortress with a mercenary company. In Ardun, Mictlan raided back one of our provinces. In Renthale, Marignon had a province captured by these two Grand Lemurs who are continuing to try to decay his entire army, but still keep missing. In Hainaf, we lose to a huge amount of province defense, which makes sense since he was finishing a fortress there. Here in the Mercs, Jomon kicks us off the fortress that our smaller raiding party had been besieging, just on account of the fact that he has a bunch more guys and a bunch of priests in order to help rout our ghosts very quickly. In the High Ocean, we managed to raid one of Mictlan's few remaining water provinces, might even be his last one. In Hergendorf, we probe a province from Agartha and see nothing other than province defense. In Rolothia, we capture one of Mictlan's provinces which he had been blood hunting and get a sanguine dowsing rod from that, which is not very useful since we're definitely not going to be breaking into blood in our very, very dead lands. In Dampdale, we raid yet another province. We capture Land's End with no resistance. In Apricia, we raid another province from Mictlan. In the Mountains of Evernight, we get raided back by Agartha. In Gerthug, we bounce into Mictlan and lose to a huge number of guys, with no mage support, including any priests to bless these Jaguar warriors. In the Ancient Woods, Agartha manages to capture one of Abyssia's fortresses and kills a couple mages in the process, and thanks to his huge blob of crossbows and mages, he loses only a handful of troops in the process. For events, we lose a little bit of income, which sucks. We get a couple air gems, which is great. We lose a little bit of population, which is okay. We are not doing anything to this fort right over here, which makes sense since we simply left one unit there and then bounced off all around it to capture these provinces, so we're going to get right back on top of it. But let's go ahead and talk about the map movement. So Agartha has essentially finished raiding back all of the land stuff and is just kind of holding on to this thing here very determinedly. We're going to be trying to hit into this with just a group of ghosts, the idea being that we can at least see what he has there, see what his script is. We have a small chance of taking the province, and if we don't lose very much in the process. We are going to continue to try to focus our raiding efforts on Atlantis and the oceans, because the oceans thus far have been pretty free. Atlantis is using these kind of bad troops to do it, or to defend them and retake provinces, so we don't want to discourage that at all. We're going to be moving some ghostly reinforcements onto this fort, potentially capturing or catching these Jaguar warriors if he tries to besiege it. And then we have this fortress under siege with some of our guys are maintaining siege, and while others are calling shadows. The reason for that is that you need to maintain siege in order to actually do damage to the walls. So the guys calling shadows are the ones who are not actively leading the ghosts. We're going to leave just a handful of guys over here and then try to do a little bit more raiding into Atlantis' territory. We're going to break siege with a huge number of guys just to make sure that absolutely nothing goes wrong, because we definitely want to leave this thing unsieged. And in retrospect, we probably should have had a couple of these guys patrolling rather than having them all summon additional ghosts, but we didn't expect Jomon to attack us at all. And the reason that Jomon made this uncharacteristically bold move was that he has been set AI. So Miscegenation, Abyssia's Pretender, had been AI for a little while now, I believe. Jomon and Mictlan both went AI in defeat. So if people know how to fight against the AI and predict their moves, then they can be a little bit better about handling this sort of thing. Since I didn't play very much single player, I'm not, totally certain what all the AI is going to be doing at any given point, but I do know that the AI will ram its head repeatedly into the same huge province defense stacks, that the AI is going to try to break siege very often, and given what we've already seen, we know that the AI doesn't necessarily like bringing priests to bless their very expensive sacreds. So these are all things that we can take advantage of when fighting Mictlan, in that he's not going to be holding down his forts quite as well, because he's going to be trying to break siege all the time, and we can exploit that by using battlefield clear traps, wailing winds, winds of death, that sort of thing, and just using big ol' armies of ghosts, which he's not going to be fielding the mage support to counter. So here I expect that we'll be able to take this fort without too much trouble. If he does move over his huge blob of guys, we'll check and see just how many priests he has, and if he doesn't have enough, it's still definitely a fight that we can take, but we'll also be able to dodge away from them if it's looking like it's not a fight that we can take. Marignon has definitely not been responding to Diplo so far, and is continuing to invade us and stuff. He's now got 2 big ol' armies on our border. And he's also keeping some Fiends, Fire Imps, and Crossbows here, just to defend his province from raiding. Given that this is a huge number of Amber Clan guys, it's not the easiest way to go around to flank him, and given that Agartha is holding onto his border very well, it doesn't look like we're going to be attacking into Marignon's heartland anytime soon. However, it is worth noting that Marignon is still very small. By owning only this section right over here, he's very limited in terms of the number of provinces that he has, and the number of provinces that he can blood hunt. That's made even more true by the fact that our Dominion is creeping into his lands, spreading these delicious death scales, and of course the population kill effect that comes from Lemuria's Dominion at all times. So Marignon, just by virtue of being relatively small and poor, is devoting a huge proportion of his resources into these attacks against me, which kind of does make sense since it is a war game, so you generally want to have all of your stuff fighting when you can, if you can make gains from it, but it also means that just things like Wind of Death traps and so on can cause a disproportionate amount of damage to Marignon, because he's going to have a harder time replacing his mages and devils and so on. So that's the game plan so far. We're going to be since we've essentially already defeated Mictlan and Joman and made them go AI, we're going to basically just be trying to profit off of their lands and finish conquering them, as we have been doing for the past couple of turns. And we might be using little fort bait stuff on Mictlan, like leaving one guy behind so that they try to break siege, and then moving an army back on to clear out the stuff inside of the fortress, just in order to make these walls come down faster. And then, of course, we'll be setting up temples in these forts once we capture them, in order to continue the free spawn production from this region over here. And that's the turn. This is turn 49 of Degeneracy. So our Lich Queen finally manages to encounter an army in our Dominion. This is the province that Agartha had been defending on our border, with a huge blob of mages with a little bit of crossbow support, and the province which we're going to be probing this turn as well, with our little group of ghosts. So his mages are all summoning up a bunch of skeletons, and while they're doing that, a couple of them are casting Iron Skin, which is a self-buff spell, which is going to make them quite a bit more durable to Rain of Stones, which coincidentally is exactly what our Lich Queen is going to be casting. So Wind of Death goes up first, and this has actually already decayed one of these mages, who is now essentially confirmed dead, and several of these blind fighters. And of course a huge number of these ghosts, but they don't really count. Then the Rain of Stone comes, and that's what really wipes out these mages. So a couple of them survive, and it's essentially just the ones which had lucked into the AI casting Iron Skin for them, on account of their being unscripted, unless he actually did script that, which is quite fortunate. And apparently this guy here has got some armor. But we've also decayed the Cave Captain, which I believe is just the Province Defense Commander. And our hope there had been to cause an HP rout with those battlefield effects, but unfortunately it was not the case. However, we still managed to cause an inordinate amount of damage with only our Lich Queen and a handful of gems. We had an assassination attempt against one of our Shadow Tribunes, which the Shadow Tribune had no trouble handling. In the Black Gorge, Atlantis actually runs into us with a bunch of guys, a lot of these magic weapon warriors, which are actually good, and these non-magic weapon warriors, which are terrible. We raid back a province over here. We lose another province over here. We lose another province to Agartha over here. and we beat up those mercenaries with our massive siege-breaking force, getting a couple soulless warriors, but losing a bunch of ghosts in the process, thanks to the fact that these mercenaries are actually quite good. In Land's End, Marignon moves away from our Wind of Death casting Grand Lemurs and captures another one of our provinces. We raid back a province with another Grand Lemur and his little retinue there. In Genom, we bump into a Tomb Oracle and are soundly defeated. Thanks to the fact that these Tomb Oracles are just giant mages, they're capable of holding these underwater provinces just fine. Even without like being geared up as super combatants, they're still just very sturdy, have a very high amount of magic resistance. He could theoretically just buff himself to be nearly immune to ghosts even without regeneration, but with his magic and province defense he can also just hold it as a giant spellcaster. Yeah, that Witherbones is clearing out a whole bunch of ghosts all at once. In this case it's rather inaccurate thanks to the fact that they're far away, but it's still more than enough to ensure that his province defense is able to get rid of the rest of the ghosts no problem. And with that, our armies are routed. We managed to kill a couple of the province defense guys, but that doesn't really count since they're just refreshed anyways. In the Sodden Merc, we raid that swamp province with this group of guys which had been moving off of Miklin's fort. In Dardania, we catch and kill a huge number of Miklin's guys, which had been trying to break siege. This fight isn't actually that impressive, since these guys are essentially just a bunch of unscripted priests and summoned chaff, which Miklin had been using to hold up the fort wall, and we have both two Grand Lemurs casting their battlefield spells, and a whole bunch of ghosts. So this is going to be very much like those fort storming battles which we've already seen, except even more one-sided thanks to the fact that it's on our terms. In Dampdale, we see Marignon once again, because he's having these guys set to attack directly in order to prevent our Lich Queen from jumping on them or any magic phase Grand Lemurs from getting off Wind of Death casts. The downside of his doing that, as you can see from these losses, is that the Fiends are jumping in ahead of the crossbows firing, which means that they get a bit shot up. So he takes some Fiend attrition there, even when just raiding back a few provinces. In Ungbaloth, we take one of Miklin's provinces. In Lake Vasnus, this is Agartha's Pretender, which I believe that we've already seen before, but which I'm going to take a look at again anyways. And this guy is geared up in with a bunch of stuff, I guess. I'm not really sure what he's trying to make himself immune to with this. I guess he has elemental armor just in case, but doesn't really need it. With anti-magic, his magic resistance is insane, made even higher by the fact that he's in friendly dominion and has a very high base magic resistance, and he could in fact buff it further with earth buffs if he really needs to. But yeah, this guy's essentially immune to ghosts, but he is also undead, which means that he is not immune to dust to dust, witherbones, that sort of thing. He also won't be immune to anti-undead siege equipment or thug equipment, so something like a Holy Scourge or a Flamberge can take him out pretty quickly. So yeah, in spite of his being very heavily built to fight nigh infinite hordes of chaff, he doesn't necessarily need all of that gear in order to be able to do that, and that gear won't protect him from the sorts of things which can be used to counter that sort of Pretender. But in Lake Vasnus, he's relatively safe, because I don't have a huge number of magic phase moving guys there to snipe him, and he's also immortal and in friendly dominion, so he wouldn't really die permanently anyways. But I could get his gear if I really cared deeply and was willing to devote a magic strike team for that. And I don't think I necessarily even have one available at this point, since I would need Astral boosters and stuff in order to get my Grand Lemurs ready for travel, aside from our very few S3 randoms. In Momef, this was the province which our Pretender had hit previously. We can see here that he's actually reinforced with a bunch of Tomb Oracles, and with the Tomb Oracle's help, he's able to hold off my poking little ghost party here. It's similar to that fight with the province defense, except he also has some real troops this time, some of whom actually die. Here we've got Miklin raiding us with a bunch of Sacreds. Here in the Great Dunes, those Grand Lemurs, which continue trying to poke for Marignon's army, just chase them around in circles, but that's no problem because they're still retaking provinces. In Sinkhole Swamp, we I think this was just a thing that we were sieging. Might have been a fort or a swamp that was empty. Yeah. This is actually what that old lizard province from way back when, which at some point we do want to start building lizards out of again, but no rush there, it's all good. In Alluvia, it's one of those sea provinces, and we lose a Shadow Tribune who had retreated. Unexpected events. This is actually potentially a spell, but it's also possibly an event. Given that we run Cold 3 anyways, it's probably not the spell, because no one would bother casting that on us. Maybe the AI likes it, I don't know. Eagle Reach Mountains, we get some air gems. Rendale, we get some income, which is nice, because this province otherwise wouldn't have any income. Range of Shadows, we get... This is actually a really good event, but in this case we rolled relatively low in terms of the gems that we got, so we only get a couple. Here in Dardania, this is where we'd gathered up our guys. This is actually potentially risky because these guys here could just jump on top of it and get rid of them. However, it's also the case that we're in friendly dominion, so the actually important guys over here are going to be respawning in our capital if Marignon does make that move and decides to kick us off of Miquelin's fort. We're moving these guys up over here, this guy being set to cast Wind of Death a couple times in order to potentially do some damage to Marignon's army if he does run into them, and retake the province without burning his gems if he doesn't, thanks to the fact that he's bringing all of these friendly ghosts with him. We're calling spirits here because we see that Miquelin has gathered all of its troops together there, which means that we probably don't necessarily want to take that fight outside of the fort unless we can have some reinforcements from, say, this guy right over here. Meanwhile, these guys are preparing to storm the castle, which should be no problem at all, given that we are ghosts and can just walk through the castle walls, so no real strong barrier there. We're back to recruiting our excellent Crystal Amazons. We've only got a couple months left on this fortress, which is also nice. And over here at this little choke point where Agartha is being held off, we continue to call shadows and apparitions so that we can have an ever larger group of ghosts which can potentially even fend off these, that's not it, Berman Heights, this Reanimator and his buddies. Since even if he's, like with just one Reanimator, that's not enough mate support to necessarily be able to get rid of them. We're going to be pushing back into Agartha again over here with a Wind of Death caster. That's under the presumption that he's going to be reinforcing the province, so if we hit it in the magic phase, we would have only what he has here now, but assuming that he moves more guys there, then the Wind of Death cast is going to be tagging him with the, with the Wind of Death after he has already moved in. We're going to be starting to hit this throne right over here, with our pretenders going to basically just be trying to rout these guys. The plan is to just use these guys in a very spread out formation so that the enemy troops get just clustered around them, and then use Soul Vortex and Wither Bones in order to just do a bunch of damage to the undead. The goal here is actually not to necessarily capture the province right away, it's to reduce the number of these Shade Shadows and Shade Beasts which are here. Given that the population has dropped dramatically, there's actually going to be very few of the living indie units, which means it's going to be an almost all undead province, and with our Wailing Wind spell, it's definitely possible that enough of them fail their morale check to cause an HP rout. And even if not, we're still going to be getting rid of a bunch of these undead with our Witherbones casts, and because both of the units that are attacking into it, our Pretender and the Grand Lemur over here, are immortal, they are going to be just respawning back into the capital even if we do lose. So it's essentially a reasonable chance of success. It's going to be getting rid of a bunch of chaff even if we fail, and it's going to have essentially no cost aside from those 2 Astral Pearls. Then once they respawn, we can basically see what they have left, and then adjust accordingly, either by moving in once again with Witherbones casts in order to clear out whatever's left, or by bringing in an actual army of ghosts in order to just overwhelm them through sheer numbers that way. And we're also going to be doing a little bit more raiding over here, just hitting these Atlantean provinces which are potentially free, just in order to continue trying to disrupt him and cause some economic damage, given that he's essentially declared himself a lifelong enemy. We're going to be moving our entire army back in over here once again. We are leaving behind the Crystal Sorceress because you actually want to get quite a few of them together to make like a nice little mini communion out of them, and that'll get all of the air magic that you can want. And air magic's pretty good, so it's definitely worth doing that. And then he has his Pretender there, but I'm not super worried about that because it's just an Earth Serpent at the stage in the game where we have like actual spells like Nether Darts and an Ethereal Crossbow, so that's definitely something that we can handle even if it is nigh immune to conventional ghosts. And then between Cold Auras and stuff, we might even be able to whittle it down even in Cold 3, and a snake that is put to sleep is not a very threatening one. So we are going to potentially, after winning this battle, move back onto Joman's Forts and continue that conquest. So Marignon remains threatening, Agartha remains threatening right over here, but we've caused significant damage to Agartha with that Rain of Stones drop, which might make him play even more conservatively, which would definitely be in our favor. Essentially, the only thing that we need to be really worried about is Agartha pushing for a throne win, just because of the fact that he's so large and actually borders a fair few thrones, and just has a bunch of H3 guys incidentally with those 2 oracles, so we need to be a little bit watchful for that. But we're actually, causing a lot of damage in terms of mage losses and so on, even if we're no longer being quite as successful with our raiding. And that's the turn.